Good morning and welcome to Mount Vernon Unitarian Church. My name is Mike Walker. I've been a member of this church for 37 years. I'm glad you could join us this morning. This isn't the Food Network. The reason we're in my kitchen is that we are privileged today to have the Reverend Keary Kincannon join us. That's why I'm making this lasagna for lunch. You know, Mount Vernon Unitarian Church members and friends have made about 1,001 lasagnas over the past 20 years to support Reverend Kincannon's hypothermia shelter. We've supported the shelter on Thursday nights during the winter, but Reverend Kincannon has been at Rising Hope Mission Church right off Route 1 every day, year-round, supporting and helping poor and marginalized people who need help. So welcome to our service today. If you are new, let me extend a special welcome. If you've made lasagnas in the past, thank you. Remember, folks, if you're ever in need, don't hesitate to contact the church office by phone or email. Now let's turn our hearts and minds to this morning's program. This morning, we dedicate this service and our special music to two women who have organized Mount Vernon Unitarian members and friends to provide meals and overnight caretakers for the winter hypothermia shelter at Rising Hope, lo these many years. Thank you, Georgia Porchot and Helen Lounsbury.
Good morning. Please join us in singing hymn 128, For All That Is Our Life. It's on your screen or in your hymnal. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build a common good. Which of us serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build a common good.
I invite you now as we unite our voices to speak aloud the covenant of our community. These words are both known within our hearts and are displayed upon your screen. Love is the teaching of this church. The quest of truth is its daily task, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve life in community, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. This is our covenant with each and with all.
Uncle Willie and the Soup Kitchen by Diane DeSalvo Ryan. Talk to me, says Uncle Willie while he picks me up from school. While Mom's at work, Uncle Willie's job is to keep an eye on me. This is fine with me, and it's just fine with Uncle Willie. But during the day, while I'm at school, my Uncle Willie has another job. He works at the soup kitchen. We fed a lot of people today, says Uncle Willie. Spaghetti and meatballs. I check my pocket and pull out my paper telescope. Why do you work there anyway? I asked, eyeballing Uncle Willie. It's important, Uncle Willie tells me. Sometimes people need help. Way up the block, I can hear the can man's clangety cart, piled high with empty cans he finds in our neighborhood. My mom says he cashes them in for money at the supermarket. Let's go, I whisper to Uncle Willie, but I think he doesn't hear me. How's business, Frank? Uncle Willie hollers. One more block and I'm done for the day, the can man hollers back. Uncle Willie picks up an empty can and tosses it into the cart. 2 points for the basket, the can man says. Since when do you know the can man? I ask Uncle Willie. Since Frank came in to eat at the soup kitchen, he says. Doesn't he have a place to live? Uncle Willie takes my hand and rocks it high and low. I never asked Frank where he lived, says Uncle Willie. In the soup kitchen, you only have to be hungry. In the morning, when Mom walks me to school, I see a woman sleeping on the park bench. She looks lonely, I say. I feel kind of sad when I see her. Mom says there are a lot of lonely people these days. That's why I'm proud of Uncle Willie. He's doing something to help. I wonder what it's like to work inside a soup kitchen. Why don't you ask Uncle Willie to take you next Monday, says Mom. Remember, you have a day off from school. All set? Asks Uncle Willie bright and early Monday morning. All set, I say. The soup kitchen is not too far from where I live, but it feels like a very long way. When we get to Mr. Anthony's meat market, I'm dragging my feet. Let's stop and see Mr. Anthony. Has anything for us today, says Uncle Willie. I got something special for you. When Mr. Anthony comes out from the back, he hands Uncle Willie a brown bag. He gives me a brown bag too. Chicken for the soup, Mr. Anthony tells us. Good for a feast, says Uncle Willie. The soup kitchen is small and bright. The 4 huge soup pots steaming on the stove make the whole place smell delicious. There are posters on the wall that say, "Have a nice day," and "No smoking, please." Look, I say, lunchroom tables just like at my school. But what's that high chair doing there? Uncle Willie takes my bag and puts it on the table. Little children come here too. Now let me introduce you all around, says Uncle Willie. First, I meet a cat. This is Underfoot. And over there is Brother Mike. Brother Mike opens up the bags from Mr. Anthony's store. Chickens, he says. That's great. Thanks for picking them up. I watch Uncle Willie cut the celery short and skinny and split the tomatoes in fours. He chops the potatoes and parsley and onions and tosses some into each soup pot. Will you help me sort the fruits and vegetables? Shanta asks. The market gave us so much fruit we can make a salad today. George says he wouldn't mind one bit if he had some extra help. I put one big bowl of peanuts, one big plate of sliced cheese, one big dish of butter, and 2 big baskets of bread on every luncheon table. Sit down already, Uncle Willie tells me, and make yourself uncomfortable. I pour a little bit of soup into a cup for underfoot. Chicken and vegetable soup, I say, my favorite. I look around at all the empty chairs. But what if there's not enough soup? I ask. Uncle Willie waves his hands. It's just like magic, he tells me. There's always a little bit more. He pulls something out of his pocket. This little clicker will count how many people come here today, so then we can make enough food for tomorrow. When I'm finished eating, I peek outside and see a long line of people from the soup kitchen door to the corner. I used to be out there on those lines, says George, but now I'm in here helping. Brother Mike ladles the steaming soup into the bowls and places one on every tray. Shanta dishes out the fruit cups and puts them next to the bowls. Uncle Willie yells out, "Lunchtime!" The first few people rush in at once. Uncle Willie says hello to just about everybody who comes in. There's Frank the can man, I whisper. Hello there, Frank, says Uncle Willie, showing him the boxes of fruit and vegetables. Help yourself, we have extra today. In no time, the soup kitchen is full. And suddenly it sounds to me as if everyone's talking at once. People come to the counter and say, "This soup is great. Can I have seconds?" You gave her more chicken than you gave me. But I was in line first. We need more bread on our table, please. I watch the guests go in and out, first hungry, then full. Come on in, calls Uncle Willie. George is walking back and forth. He picks up the dirty dishes from the counter and carries them back to the sink. Before I know it, the line outside the soup kitchen is gone. A few of the guests stay to help us all clean up. I hold the dustpan steady while Double Jim sweeps a pile for me to scoop. When Uncle Willie and I are ready to leave, we shake hands with all the helpers. Brother Mike pushes open the big front door. Come again any time, he says. We can always use the extra help. Thanks again for the soup, I holler to everyone else in the back. Underfoot liked it too. On the way home, Uncle Willie shows me the counter. We fed 121 people today, he says. That's a lot of citizens. I pull my paper telescope out of my pocket and eyeball Uncle Willie. Uncle Willie looks like one big smile. Laughing, he picks up an empty can and hands it to me. I take the can and head for the trash. I turn, I fake, I jump, I shoot. Talk to me, says Uncle Willie, and he hoots as I score 2 more points for the basket.
Mount Vernon Unitarian Church continues to share the plate with committed organizations that you, our members, have chosen. During the month of February, our offering is being shared with Friends of Guest House. Friends of Guest House helps women successfully re-enter the community from incarceration. They've been working in our community since 1972. We are a community that invites spiritual and material generosity from our members and friends. I give because MVUC is my spiritual home and my sacred community. I want to invest in it in the same way that I invest in my physical home, so it will be there for generations to come to enjoy and get love and spirituality and comfort from in the same way that I have been able to benefit for all these years. I invite this gathered community to offer whatever you are most comfortable with in spirit and financial generosity for the mission of this church community. If you'd like to write and mail a check for the offering, please make it out to MVUC and in the memo line, indicate how you would like it to be used. You can also follow the link in the chat box to make a one-time or recurring payment. We are so grateful for your donation.
The pain
Today, we welcome Reverend Keary Kincannon to our pulpit. Kincannon, a graduate of Fort Hunt High School, has been a dynamic force for people in the Route 1 corridor and a conscience to the larger community. He is truly the living embodiment of our first Unitarian principle, the inherent worth and dignity of all people. For me, he's been the living embodiment of Jesus Christ himself. Welcome, Reverend Keary Kincannon.
Good morning. My name is Keary Kincannon. I was delighted when Mike Walker called and extended the invitation for me to come and share the Sunday morning message with you today. We're no strangers to each other, Mount Vernon Unitarian and myself. We have a history of working together in this community to bring about justice with the poor and the marginalized in our community. As you know, I'm the founding pastor of Rising Hope Mission Church some 27 years ago. Retired pastor emeritus now, but I'm not dead yet, and I see myself as still having a role to push and to nudge and to help move our county and community to create a more loving, just community, the kind of community that God intended for us at creation. And I know I've crossed paths with many of you as we have together fed the hungry, clothed the naked, welcomed the stranger. I've sat with some of you in the hypothermia shelter, sitting next to and having conversations with homeless individuals. We've worked together through ventures in community, VIC meetings, and we've worked together with voice as we've sought to bring about legislative justice for not just our community, but the entire state. I've long admired the mission statement that you have at Mount Vernon Unitarian Church, to support one another in your spiritual journey, to work for justice, to care for the earth, and build the common good. And you have two former pastors that I cannot speak highly enough about, the Reverend Dr. Linda Peoples and the Reverend Dr. Kate Walker. I have counted it an honor to work side by side with them in the community to fight for justice for the poor and marginalized members of our community. And myself, I have some 45 plus years of a career of working with the poor and the disenfranchised members of our community. So when Mike called me to preach, I asked him, well, what do you want me to preach on? And he said, well, why don't you talk about what motivates you? What has led you to have a life where you have given your whole career over to working for the community that doesn't have all the advantages that some of the rest of us have? But in order to do that, I'm going to have to get personal, because I'm going to have to share with you my spiritual journey and how I understand my call to this kind of lifestyle. Now, doing that, my language is going to sound a little bit more evangelical than I think you normally hear in a Unitarian church. I'm going to try to use some more universalist language, but there I know times where I'm not only going to slip into a more evangelical language, but I don't know how to express it other than using an evangelical language, because that will be speaking the truth for me. And I know that you will give me the grace to be able to share with you in this way. Will you pray with me? Lord, open us up to the great abundance of your love. Help us to live into that love and know that there was nowhere that you and your love is not present. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts now be acceptable unto you, our rock and redeemer. Amen. I graduated from Fort Hunt High School right down the road in 1967. And you will remember that 1967, our country was still actively involved in the civil rights movement, although we had won some victories by this time. And we were right in the midst of a very unpopular war in Vietnam that bitterly divided our country. 1967 was also the summer of love. Flower power, hippies, and the mass rejection of the Ozzie and Harriet conformist lifestyle. We were a generation that decided to grow out our hair long, and some of us have grown it back to give up neatly pressed pants and skirts in favor of blue jeans. We were a generation that took for granted the comforts, the material comforts that our parents had built for us. And that led us to search for experiences, new experiences in life, to find ourselves and to search for a community that shared our values and our rejection of what we saw the establishment's values to be. We were largely united in our opposition to the Vietnam War and united in our desire not to enter into the rat race way of life. We were interested in things like art and music and painting and poetry. And some of us got interested into politics and spiritual and meditative practices. Tune in, turn on, and drop out was our motto. We were going to change the world. We were a generation that was not afraid to question authority and to explore alternative ways of living. Make love, not war. Flower power, back to nature, power to the people. Martin Luther King Jr. was teaching us about nonviolent resistance. Allen Ginsberg, William Sloane Coffin, Daniel Berrigan, Muhammad Ali, Baba Ram Dass, Timothy Leary, Bob Dylan, Jerry Rubin, John Lennon, they were all convincing me that another world was possible. You know, I was convinced that our generation was going to be the generation that was going to end war, end racism, and end a consumerism that was killing our planet. Our generation held all the answers to life, or so I thought. Unfortunately, drugs were also a big part of that lifestyle. Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead has said of that time that there was a lot of LSD and other psychedelic drugs, but it was really about exploration, finding new ways of expression and being aware of one's existence. But for some of us, myself included, that exploration led to a hedonistic self-indulgence. I soon became more interested in the drug, sex, and rock and roll aspects of my generation. I had little direction in my life except to get high, to listen to music, and to oppose the establishment. And I flunked out of college. I tried my hand at dealing pot for a while, scoring 10 pounds of marijuana and breaking it down into 10-ounce bags to sell back to my friends. But the drugs I consumed were making me paranoid, and I became both anxious and depressed. All the ideals that I had believed in this hippie culture were also beginning to crumble in front of me. The war in Vietnam was only escalating with the invasion of Cambodia. Kent State students were shot and killed by the National Guard. Many peace-loving hippies were now becoming revolutionary, violent, espousing yippies. The Weather Underground was planting bombs in government buildings. The peace and love of Woodstock was followed by the Rolling Stones' Altamont Free concert, where the Hells Angels killed 4 people. But instead of make love, not war, we were beginning to substitute sex for love. The Beatles broke up, and I was a college flunky with no direction in my life. Then one day at an outdoor rock festival, everything changed for me. That was the era of the Jesus freaks, and they were at this festival in droves, and they were willing to witness to anybody who would stop and give them the time. Now, I grew up in a liberal Methodist church, and I knew already that there were very different theological approaches to understanding the Bible. And fortunately, I was aware of all of this, and I knew that I did not accept this fundamentalist way of looking at life and the Bible, the theology that the Jesus freaks had. But they got me thinking. They were so convinced that Jesus was the answer to everything, that Jesus was the ultimate high, that I had to go off by myself to the side of the concert grounds, sit and reflect on my church upbringing. I was feeling horrible about myself, about my failures, about the hopelessness that had consumed me. I had come to realize that the hippie movement that I had embraced could be just as misguided, corrupt, and immoral as the generation that I denounced. I had no truth to hold on to. But what did Jesus have to say about life? I asked myself. I started thinking about the Sunday school lessons I had learned when I was growing up. And in spite of how horrible I was feeling about myself, I wasn't drawn to the comforting words of Jesus, words like, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Nah, that seemed too easy. That seemed like a cop-out. It didn't answer any of my questions about what's the meaning of life? How are we supposed to live? What's going to bring peace? What's going to end racism? What's going to stop the exploitation of the vulnerable? Instead, I was drawn to the difficult teachings of Jesus, teachings like this morning's reading. "You have heard that it was said Jesus, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love like those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your Father in heaven is perfect." These are words from the Gospel of Matthew. That scripture came to my mind as I was there on those concert grounds, and it changed my life. Somehow I knew that I had found the answer that I was looking for in the teachings of Jesus. Much of the idealism that the hippies espoused, well, it wasn't wrong. In fact, much of that idealism was right on, even if we had taken some very destructive turns in our lifestyles. Our political demands for social change, to stop the war, women's rights, Black power, a clean environment, these were all demands that are in line with the kingdom of God that Jesus preached about. But at that moment, I became aware that our idealism and demands were not enough to change the world. They don't go deep enough. To coin a phrase, Martin Luther King Jr. said that demonstrations and judicial decrees and legislation can restrain the heartless, but they may have little effect on the heart. Political power, as important as it is, can only affect so much. What's going to change the world? I began to see that the Jesus freaks were right, that Jesus is the answer, not in the shallow confessions that so many people offer, but in real change happens when the heart is converted to love, unconditional love, a love that excludes no one, not even your enemy. Real change happens when you are converted to loving others the way that Jesus loved and taught us to love. At that moment, my life changed. All the doubt and despair and negativity that I held within myself left me. And I still get goosebumps when I think about that moment because it was very real to me. I could see a cloud of this doubt and despair rising from me and leaving and dissipating into the skies. And at that moment, then, I was filled with a warm, tingling sensation. I'd been touched by the truth of God. My evangelical friends would tell me that I had been filled with the Holy Spirit when I accepted Jesus into my life. Well, I guess I would say that I found the truth in the impossible demand of Jesus to love my enemy and to be perfect. Strangely enough, rather than feeling defeated by the impossibility of this demand, this passage instilled a new direction in my life. Now, I am far from being perfect as Jesus was perfect in the love that he was able to bring. But I am convinced that to love like Jesus, to love the way that he taught and to love the way that he loved, is the answer to life. It's the ultimate answer that's going to solve our problems, bring peace, end war, end racism. And that has been the direction of my life ever since. God's love for us is very personal and it is life-changing, especially if we understand that our response is to live into that love. Jesus makes it clear that living into that love means loving our neighbor. And he tells the story of the Good Samaritan to emphasize that our neighbor includes everyone, and we are to love everyone, even those that we most despise. One thing led to another for me, and I got back into college. I graduated. I went on to seminary and graduated from seminary. But instead of taking a church, I joined a group called Sojourners. And maybe some of you are aware of Jim Wallace and Sojourners magazine. It's a magazine and a faith-based social justice movement. Sojourners describes their mission as articulating the biblical call to social justice, inspiring hope and building a movement to transform individuals, communities, the church, and the world. I was drawn to Sojourners' mission, but also to the fact that we were a ragtag group of countercultural hippie misfits. I lived with them in communal households in Washington, D.C. for over a decade. We lived in the low-income neighborhood of Columbia Heights, and at that time, we were the only whites living in that community. There, I started organizing tenants to help them get repairs to their buildings, get repairs from their unscrupulous landlords, to get the heat turned on, to get plumbing fixed, to get falling plaster fixed. And in some cases, I was able to help those tenants buy their apartment buildings and turn them into tenant-owned cooperatives. And in some of those cases, those tenants were then paying their share of the mortgage for a completely renovated building that was less than they were paying for rent. That experience of working in that community had a profound effect on me. I had been invited into homes with people who were very different from me, had a very different economic background, different racially, different cultural background. For the most part, these families were those that had been marginalized by society and were scraping to get by. Many of them lived hardships in their lives that I had never even thought about as a possibility for myself. Yet somehow I was accepted into their homes. And in being accepted by them, I found a home. My organizing and my justice work at that time was very fulfilling for me. I was becoming aware that God was calling me to the margins, that God was planting my feet firmly with those who lived on the margins of poverty and society. I was being called to love like Jesus. But I was also beginning to feel the call to share that love and invite others to live into that love. So I started talking with the Virginia Conference of the United Methodist Church, and I tried to see about the possibility of being appointed to pastor a local church. But I was very clear with the conference representatives that I was meeting with. I was telling them, yes, I feel like I'm being called to be a pastor, but I was not being called to pastor a middle-class church. I was called to be a pastor among the poor and marginalized. I don't think they knew what to do with me. I had to have numerous conversations with them for over a year and a half. I think they had those conversations with me just to make sure that I wasn't crazy. But then my district superintendent eventually took my request to the bishop. And he came back, my district superintendent, and told me, Keary, we don't have any churches that match your calling. And quite frankly, that was the answer I was expecting to get. But then with a glint in his eye and a smile on his face, he said, but let's start a church like that. And that was the beginning of Rising Hope. Rising Hope has been a place where my feet have firmly been grounded with those who have been marginalized and cast off by society. But Rising Hope has also been a place where I have had the opportunity to break down some of those walls that divide us by bringing black and white together, poor and wealthy, gay and straight, the abused and the entitled. And I hope my efforts have taught us to not stereotype one another, but see each other as real humans and to love one another for what we share in sharing a life in this world together. What have I learned from my life's work? Well, one, I really do believe that every person on earth is called to love their neighbor as their self, that's a universal calling for us all. Two, that our call is not based on our worthiness, but on our willingness. I was certainly not living an exemplary lifestyle when I was called, but I was searching. Three, I do not believe that we are called to do what is easy, but we are called to do what will create a more just and loving world. Loving those different from ourselves is not always easy. It includes not only loving those who we despise in society, but loving our enemy. 4, we are called to the margins of society. We are called to the margins of our comfort zone, not merely to make a difference in the world, but so that we might be made different. When we bring love, we are changed by the love that we bring. 5, even if we believe that our role is to love our neighbor as ourselves, it makes very little difference if we don't put that into action. There is a whole lot of pain in this world that needs you to be the agent of divine love. 6, the specifics of how we are called to respond to our neighbors in need depends upon the gifts and the graces and the talents that were instilled in us and in our life's circumstances. But the one thing I know for sure is that we are called to love everyone, called to love everyone unconditionally, without exception, because that is how we are loved. Thank you for letting me share with you today.
Good morning. Please join us in singing hymn 159 from your gray hymnal or from your screen.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we gather together again.
For all that is our lives, for all life is a gift that we are called to use to build the common good. Well, let's build that common good together. May it be so, may it be.
Perfect.
Thanks.
That's beautiful.
All
Hey,
right.
that's beautiful. I love it. I love the lasagna too.